The Monday it began felt like any other Monday, which, in retrospect, was perhaps the most unsettling part of it all. The fluorescent lights of Innovate Solutions Incorporated hummed their familiar, monotonous song overhead, a sound so ingrained in my daily existence that I only ever noticed it when it inexplicably stopped, usually due to a power flicker that sent a brief, panicked ripple through the open-plan office. I remember the scent of slightly stale coffee and the distant, rhythmic clatter of keyboards, the comforting symphony of a workforce gearing up for another week of projects, deadlines, and the quiet, simmering politics that underpin any corporate environment. My name is Mark Petrov, or at least, it was. I was, by all accounts, a competent senior analyst, meticulous in my work, perhaps a little too fond of process, but reliable. That reliability, I think, was the first part of me they started to erase. My routine was a well-oiled machine. Arrive at 8:45 a.m., boot up the Dell workstation, check emails, prioritize tasks for the day, then a quick trip to the break room for my first cup of surprisingly tolerable office coffee. That morning, I noticed the first anomaly, so small I almost dismissed it. An email from Sarah Jenkins, my direct manager, regarding the Phoenix Projector flagship initiative for the quarter was addressed to Chloe, Ben, CC, Mark P. Usually, as a key contributor to Phoenix, I was in the tow field. A minor oversight, I reasoned. Sarah was juggling a dozen things. I made a mental note to gently remind her about my primary role if it happened again, and then promptly forgot about it as I delved into data reconciliation. The Phoenix project was my baby, or at least, one I'd helped midwife. I'd been there from the initial feasibility studies, through the late-night brainstorming sessions that had actually, for once, yielded something valuable. My analytical models underpinned a significant portion of its strategic direction, so, to be merely carbon-copied felt off, like being invited to your own party but asked to sit at the kiddie table. Later that morning, Chloe Dubois, the Phoenix team lead, called an impromptu huddle. I only realized it had happened when I saw her, Ben Carter from the adjacent cubicle, and two junior analysts returning from the small meeting room near the window, animatedly discussing something. "Oh, Mark," Chloe said, noticing my questioning look. "Sorry, that was just a quick touch base. Last-minute thing. I'll fill you in later." She smiled, a little too brightly, and hurried back to her desk. Ben just gave me a cursory nod, already engrossed in his screen. I felt a prickle of unease, a tiny splinter under the skin of my professional composure. Being left out of a Phoenix huddle, however brief, was not standard procedure. Lunch was a solitary affair at my desk, a habit I'd fallen into to maximize productivity, though sometimes I wondered if it contributed to a sense of detachment. I ate my sandwich and reviewed a departmental memo circulated by Human Resources regarding upcoming system maintenance. My name, listed among others in the affected department, was misspelled Mark Petrie. A small thing, easily corrected. I'd had my surname garbled before. Petrov wasn't the most common. Still, it added to the faint static of wrongness that had begun to hum beneath the surface of the day. After lunch, I swung by Janice Albright's desk in HR. Janice was a matronly woman, usually efficient. "Just a small typo on the memo, Janice," I said, pointing it out on my printout. "Petrov, not Petrie." She peered at it over her glasses. "Oh dear. So sorry, Mark. I'll make sure it's corrected in the digital master." Her apology was genuine, yet the error lingered in my mind. The afternoon brought a brainstorming session for a new marketing initiative, tangentially related to Phoenix. Sarah led it. I was, I thought, quite active, contributing several ideas, one of which a targeted social media campaign leveraging user-generated content seemed to gain particular traction. I felt a small surge of satisfaction. My ideas were still valued, clearly. The earlier slights were just background noise, the usual office static. But then, on Tuesday morning, Sarah's minutes from that brainstorming session landed in my inbox. My key idea, the one about user-generated content, was attributed to general team input. Another, smaller suggestion I'd made was credited directly to Ben. My name wasn't mentioned in connection with any specific contribution. I stared at the email, the cursor blinking mockingly on the screen. This wasn't oversight. This felt more like revision. I walked over to Sarah's office. Her door was ajar. "Sarah, do you have a moment? About the brainstorming minutes?" She looked up, a harried expression on her face. "Mark, a bit swamped right now. Can it wait?" "It's just one of the ideas attributed to general input, the social media campaign one. That was mine, and Ben's credited with another point I believe I raised." I tried to keep my tone neutral, factual. Sarah sighed, tapping her pen. "Look, Mark, it was a dynamic session. Ideas were flying. The specific attribution isn't as important as capturing the essence. We're a team, right?" "Of course," I said, "but for clarity and, well, for proper credit." "I'll look into it when I get a chance," she said, her eyes already drifting back to her monitor. Dismissal, polite but firm. I retreated to my cubicle, the word team echoing strangely in my head. A team, yes, but one where my contributions were becoming anonymized. The rest of Tuesday passed in a blur of spreadsheets and reports. I buried myself in the familiar comfort of data, of numbers that, unlike people, behaved predictably. But the unease was a persistent thrum. I found myself double-checking email recipients, scrutinizing my calendar for missed appointments. I was becoming paranoid, I told myself. A few minor glitches, amplified by a stressful project. Wednesday, the weekly Phoenix Project status report, which I meticulously compiled every Tuesday evening and submitted to Chloe for review and distribution, was discussed in the team meeting. I sat there, waiting for my section to come up, ready to elaborate on the data trends I'd identified. Chloe, however, presented the entire report as if she had collated all the data herself. She moved through my slides, my graphs, my carefully worded analyses, with a smooth, confident narration that never once mentioned my name or my work. I tried to interject. "Chloe, on that point about user engagement metrics." My voice sounded thin, reedy. She didn't pause. Ben, seated next to me, shifted slightly, but otherwise, no one seemed to register my attempt to speak. It was as if I'd spoken too softly, or at an inopportune moment, but I knew I hadn't. I felt a flush creep up my neck. I was being systematically sidelined, and it was happening right in front of me, in the full view of my colleagues. After the meeting, I approached Chloe. "Chloe, that was my analysis on the engagement metrics, and the risk assessment section, I compiled that." She looked at me, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Annoyance? Confusion? "Mark, everyone contributes. It's a team effort. The report was a synthesis." "But I wrote those specific sections. Verbatim," I insisted, my voice firmer now. "Let's not get bogged down in who did what tiny piece, Mark. The important thing is the project is on track." She turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, feeling like a pedantic fool, but also profoundly disturbed. This wasn't about not getting bogged down in tiny pieces. This was about the erasure of my direct, significant work. That evening, I went home with a knot in my stomach. I lived alone in a small apartment across town. My life was largely my work, a few old college friends I saw sporadically, a weekly call to my sister in California. I had always found a certain solace in the order and predictability of my job at Innovate Solutions. Now, that order was fracturing. Thursday, the first truly undeniable sign that something was actively working against me. My calendar invite for the bi-weekly Phoenix stakeholder meeting, the big one, with senior management and client representatives, was missing. I always attended these. I usually had a speaking part, presenting the latest performance data. I checked my deleted items, my spam folder. Nothing. I hurried to Chloe's desk. "Chloe, I don't seem to have the invite for the stakeholder meeting this afternoon." She frowned, scrolling through something on her screen. "That's odd. I thought you were on the list. Let me check." A few clicks. "Ah, you're right. You weren't on the distribution. An oversight, I'm sure." She manually forwarded me the invitation. "There you go." An oversight. Again. The word was beginning to sound like a euphemism for something far more deliberate. During the stakeholder meeting, I attempted to ask a clarifying question about a new proposed timeline. I raised my hand. Sarah, chairing the meeting, looked right past me. I spoke up. If I could just ask about the resource allocation for Q4. My voice was clear, adequately loud. Heads turned, but not to me. They looked around, as if trying to locate the source of a distant sound. Then, one of the senior managers, Mr. Henderson, addressed a different point entirely, and the conversation moved on. It was as if I hadn't spoken at all. A cold sweat broke out on my palms. Friday, I logged into the internal project portal, intending to upload my latest dataset. My access to the Phoenix project folder was denied. A red banner flashed across the screen. You do not have the required permissions to access this resource. My blood ran cold. This wasn't an oversight. This was a system actively barring me. I called IT. Dave Miller, the usually affable, slightly rumpled technician who had helped me with countless minor issues over the years, answered. IT, Dave speaking. Dave, it's Mark Petroff. I'm trying to access the Phoenix project folder, and it's saying my permissions are denied. Mark Petroff, Dave mumbled, presumably typing. Okay, what's your employee ID number? I recited it from memory, the number that had been my digital key for 5 years. A pause. Huh, that's weird. That ID, 774,902, isn't showing up as active for Phoenix access privileges. Are you sure you're still assigned to that project, Mark? Yes, Dave, I'm sure. My voice was sharper than I intended. I've been on it since its inception. I was accessing the folder yesterday. Well, the system says otherwise now, Dave said, his tone still helpful but laced with a new note of official doubt. Look, I can see you're listed as an employee, general access, but nothing specific for Phoenix. I'll have to escalate this to Tier 2. Might take a day or two for them to look into it. System's been a bit flaky since the update. A day or two. With the stakeholder report due. My stomach churned. Can't you just reinstate it? It's clearly a glitch. Sorry, Mark. Process. Got to follow process. Dave sounded genuinely regretful, but also intractable. Process. The very thing I usually championed. Now it was a wall. I spent the rest of Friday feeling like a man treading water in a rising tide. I tried to talk to Sarah again. She was in back-to-back meetings. I left a detailed, urgent voicemail. I emailed her, Chloe and Dave, outlining the access issue and its critical impact on my ability to contribute to the Phoenix reporting cycle. The email sat in my outbox, pending send, for an unusually long time before finally disappearing, presumably sent. I never received a delivery receipt, nor any response. That weekend was agonizing. I replayed every interaction, every dismissed comment, every missing invitation. I meticulously documented everything in a private spreadsheet on my home laptop, timestamping each occurrence, noting who was involved. I felt like an investigator building a case, but the crime was nebulous, the perpetrators seemingly unaware, or worse, deliberately obtuse. I tried to log into my work email from home on Saturday evening. Invalid credentials. The message was stark, unequivocal. The system maintenance Janice had mentioned. Had it somehow targeted me? Or was this part of the same creeping, inexplicable erasure? I told myself it was probably the maintenance, a temporary lockout, but a small, cold voice whispered that it was something more. The walk to Innovate Solutions Incorporated on Monday morning, the start of week 2 of this unraveling, felt different. The city air, usually just a backdrop to my commute, seemed sharper, the faces of other pedestrians more remote. I clutched my briefcase, the strap digging into my palm. Inside, along with my usual work items, was a printout of my meticulously compiled log of incidents. Evidence. Proof. Of what? I wasn't entirely sure anymore. Negligence? A bizarre, targeted prank? Or something that my rational mind still refused to fully articulate. I swiped my ID badge at the turnstile. It beeped green, a small measure of relief. At least I could still get in the building. My cubicle was in B wing, 3rd row from the window. As I approached, I noticed something amiss even from a distance. My ergonomic chair, the one I'd special ordered through HR due to a persistent lower back issue, the one with the mesh back and adjustable lumbar support, was gone. In its place was a standard, hard-backed, unyielding office chair, the kind usually reserved for temporary staff or hot desks. There was no note, no explanation, just the silent, uncomfortable substitution. Ben was already at his desk, headphones on, typing furiously. He didn't look up. "Ben," I said, perhaps a little too loudly. He startled, pulling off one headphone. "Oh, hey Mark, didn't hear you come in." "My chair," I said, pointing. "Did you see who swapped it?" Ben glanced at the offending chair, then back at me, a blank look on his face. "Chair? Looks like a chair to me. What's up with it?" "It's not my chair. Mine was the ergonomic one, the one I've had for 2 years. Ben shrugged. "Dunno, man. Didn't notice anything. Maybe building services needed yours for someone else?" Building services. Right. I made my way to their small, cluttered office in the basement. Frank, the supervisor, a burly man with a perpetually grease-stained shirt, looked up from a complicated diagram of the HVAC system. "Frank, it's Mark Petrov from B-Wing. My chair seems to have been replaced. The ergonomic one?" Frank scratched his head. "Petrov, don't recall any work order for a chair swap in B-Wing today. Or last week, for that matter. You sure it wasn't just moved for cleaning and they put the wrong one back?" "It's definitely not my chair," I insisted. "Could you check your records?" He grumbled but typed something into his ancient computer. "Nope, no chair requisitions, no swaps logged for a Petrov M or for cubicle B, 47. Sorry, pal, nothing I can do if it ain't in the system." Not in the system. The phrase was becoming a chilling refrain. I returned to my cubicle and reluctantly sat in the uncomfortable chair. It felt symbolic, a physical manifestation of my diminishing status. I tried to log into my workstation. Login failed. Please check your username and password or contact your system administrator. My breath hitched. Not again. I tried again, carefully typing my password. Same message. I picked up my desk phone to call IT. No dial tone. I jiggled the receiver. Nothing. Dead. I looked at Ben. He was still engrossed. I hesitated, then used my mobile phone to call Dave in IT. Dave speaking. "Dave, it's Mark Petrov again. My workstation login is failing, and my desk phone is dead." "Petrov." Dave sounded weary. "Okay, Mark, let me check. 774,902, right?" "Yes." A longer pause this time. The clatter of his keyboard was audible over the line. "Mark, I'm seeing your employee ID here, but it's flagged as inactive, pending offboarding. Your network access, including telephony, would be automatically suspended under that status." "Offboarding?" My voice cracked. "What are you talking about? I haven't resigned. I haven't been terminated. Who flagged it like that?" "Don't know, Mark. That's an HR flag. System just does what it's told. You'll need to talk to human resources about that one." "Sorry." He sounded genuinely apologetic, but also like he was washing his hands of the problem. He disconnected before I could ask more. HR, Sarah, my manager. Someone had to have an answer. I practically ran to Sarah's office. Her door was closed. I knocked, a sharp, urgent rap. "Come on," her voice, muffled. I opened the door. She was on a video call, her face tight with concentration. She glanced at me, held up a finger, "Wait," and continued her call. I stood there, feeling increasingly desperate, my carefully prepared log of incidents clutched in my hand. The call seemed to stretch for an eternity. Finally, she ended it with a forced smile and a click of her mouse. She looked at me, her expression carefully neutral. "Yes, Mark, what is it? I'm rather busy." "Sarah, it just told me my network access is suspended because my employee ID is flagged for pending offboarding. My desk phone is dead, I can't log in. What is going on?" Sarah frowned, but it wasn't a frown of concern. It was distant, as if I were a stranger recounting a problem that didn't involve her. "Offboarding? That's an HR process, Mark. I don't directly handle those flags. Are you transitioning out of the company?" My jaw tightened. "No, Sarah, I am not transitioning out of the company. You're my manager. Wouldn't you know if I were leaving, or if I were being let go?" She leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. "Well, typically, yes. But administrative processes can sometimes get ahead of formal communications, especially in a large organization. Perhaps there's a reassignment or a redundancy notice that hasn't reached you yet." Her calmness was infuriating. It was inhuman. "Sarah, look at me. We've worked together for 3 years, on Phoenix, on countless other projects. You know my work. Why would I be off-boarded without a word to me, or from you?" She met my gaze, and for a fleeting second, I thought I saw a flicker of something. Recognition? Confusion? But it vanished, replaced by a smooth, professional mask. "Mark, if there's an issue with your employment status, your first port of call really should be HR. They manage the records. I only manage the workflow for my active team members." Active team members. The implication hung heavy in the air. "So, you're saying I'm not an active team member anymore?" "I'm saying HR will have the definitive answer on your status," she said, her voice gentle but firm, the kind one uses with a difficult child or a confused elderly relative. She was creating distance, pushing me away with bureaucratic platitudes. I left her office, the unread log of incidents still in my hand, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the office air conditioning. My manager, the person who should have been my advocate, my first line of defense, was either complicit or utterly, terrifyingly, oblivious to my existence as her employee. My next stop, inevitably, was human resources. The walk to their department on the 4th floor felt like traversing enemy territory. Every passing colleague whose eye I tried to catch seemed to look through me, their conversations continuing uninterrupted. Was I imagining it? Was my heightened anxiety making me misinterpret normal office behavior? Linda Grayson, the head of HR, had an office with a large glass window, presumably for transparency, though it felt more like a display case. Her assistant, a young man named Kevin, whose name tag I had to squint to read, informed me that Linda was in a meeting but could perhaps spare a few minutes. I waited on an uncomfortable sofa, the corporate art on the walls, abstract swirls of blue and gray, feeling oppressive. Finally, Kevin ushered me in. Linda Grayson was a woman in her late 50s, impeccably dressed, with an air of unshakable, anodyne professionalism. "Mr. Petrov, is it?" she began, consulting a note on her desk, mispronouncing my name slightly, Petrov instead of Petrov. "Yes, Mark Petrov," I corrected, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "There seems to be a serious issue with my employment status. My network access has been revoked. My manager, Sarah Jenkins, seemed unsure of my role, and IT informed me I'm flagged for pending offboarding." Linda frowned delicately. "Petrov, Mark. Let me just pull up your file." She typed into her computer, her manicured nails clicking softly on the keyboard. The silence stretched. I could hear the hum of her computer, the distant traffic outside. Then, she looked up, her expression one of polite puzzlement. "I'm sorry, Mr. Petrov, but I don't seem to have a current employee file under that name, or any recent record of offboarding for a Mark Petrov." My heart plummeted. "That's impossible. I've been with Innovate Solutions for 5 years, senior analyst. Employee ID 774,902. I rattled it off, the number seared into my brain. She typed again. 774,902. "No, that ID doesn't correspond to any active or recently active employee in our system." "Are you quite sure you have the correct company, Mr. Petrov? Or perhaps the correct ID number?" This was a nightmare, a bureaucratic, gaslighting nightmare. "This is Innovate Solutions Incorporated, on Elm Street, correct? I work here. I have an ID badge." I fumbled for my wallet, pulled out the plastic card, and slapped it on her desk. Linda picked it up gingerly. She examined it, turning it over in her fingers. "Well, this badge is an older format. We phased these out about 18 months ago. And the photograph," she squinted at it. "It's quite blurry, isn't it? Almost indistinct." I snatched it back, the photograph. It had been a standard, slightly unflattering but perfectly clear ID photo. Now, looking at it under the harsh fluorescent light of Linda's office, my face seemed smudged. The edges were blurred, my features less defined, as if viewed through a dirty lens. It wasn't blurry before, I whispered, more to myself than to her. Mr. Petrov, Linda said, her voice softening into a tone of synthetic compassion. Sometimes people get confused. Or perhaps you're a former employee from some time ago, and your memory is playing tricks. We do have robust record-keeping systems here. Former employee, memory playing tricks. She was suggesting I was delusional. I am not confused. I stood up, my hands clenched. I have colleagues who can verify my employment. Ben Carter, Chloe Dubois, Sarah Jenkins. My projects, my reports, they're all in your systems. Linda's expression became a little more guarded. If you like, I can make some discreet inquiries. But as of now, officially, the name Mark Petrov and the ID number you provided do not exist in our current employee database. Her use of officially was like a door slamming shut. I stumbled out of her office, the blurry ID badge clutched in my hand like a talisman of a reality that was rapidly dissolving. The rest of that day, week 2, was a descent into a specific kind of hell. I returned to the empty space where my cubicle had been. The uncomfortable chair was still there. I sat in it, a ghost at a feast of productivity that no longer included me. Ben, in the next cubicle, never once glanced my way, even when I deliberately coughed or rustled papers I'd retrieved from the recycling bin. He was sealed in his own world, a world where, apparently, I no longer registered. I tried to access the company intranet from a public terminal in the library. Denied. I tried to find old company newsletters in the online archive. The search function returned no hits for Mark Petrov. I was certain my name had appeared in them before. A mention for a successful project completion, a team photo from the summer picnic 2 years ago. I remembered that picnic photo clearly. I was standing next to Sarah, squinting into the sun. I'd even joked about my awkward smile. My access card, the one Linda had dismissed as an old format, still, bafflingly, worked on the main building doors and the turnstiles. But then a truly chilling thought occurred. I walked to a door clearly marked Authorized Personnel Only, R.D. Labs. A door I had never, ever had access to. I held my badge to the reader. It beeped. Green. The lock clicked open. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't that my old access was lingering. It was that the system no longer recognized me as someone who shouldn't have access. I was becoming undefined, a nullity, not bound by the rules because the rules no longer applied to a non-person. I didn't go in. I backed away, a profound terror gripping me. The days of that second week bled into one another. I continued to show up. Where else could I go? My apartment still felt like mine. My key still worked in the lock, but the office, this place where I had poured so much of my life, was actively expelling me, like a body rejecting a foreign organ. Or rather, like a photograph fading to blank paper. The third Monday I arrived with a grim determination. My goal was no longer to reclaim my job, but to understand. To find a crack in this wall of unreality. I went directly to the security office. Gregson, the security chief, was a former military police officer, a man who radiated an aura of no-nonsense authority. "Mr. Gregson, I need to see security footage," I stated, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. He looked up from a bank of monitors, his eyes narrowed. "Name and department?" "Mark Petrov, formerly senior analyst, B-Wing. My workstation, cubicle B47, was cleared out last Monday. I need to see the footage of that area from Friday, the 10th, and Monday, the 13th. Gregson typed something into his console. "Don't have a Mark Petrov listed as an active employee." "I know, that's part of the problem. Please, just check the footage, it's important." My voice was tight with suppressed panic. Perhaps it was the desperation in my tone, or perhaps he was simply bored, but he grunted. "All right, B47 you said, Friday the 10th. He manipulated a joystick, and one of the screens flickered, then settled on an overhead view of my cubicle row. The timestamp in the corner confirmed the date and time. And there I was. I saw myself, clear as day, sitting at my desk, working on my computer. I saw myself get up, walk to the printer, return. My ergonomic chair was visible. My personal items, a framed photo of my sister, a small potted cactus, my collection of quirky coffee mugs, were all there. There, I exclaimed, pointing, a surge of triumph, of validation, washing over me. That's me. That's my desk, as it was on Friday. Gregson leaned closer, squinting at the screen. He adjusted the contrast. Where? I see cubicle B47. It's empty. Looks like it's been empty for a while. Dust covers on the monitor and CPU in the adjacent bay too. That whole section looks decommissioned. My triumph curdled into disbelief. What? No. Look, I'm right there. I jabbed my finger at my own image on the screen. Gregson looked from my finger to the screen, then back to me, his expression unreadable. Son, there's no one in that cubicle. The chair is a standard model, no personal items visible. Are you feeling all right? I stared at the screen. My image, so clear to me moments before, flickered. Not the screen, but my perception of it. It was like one of those optical illusion posters, where one image resolves into another if you stare long enough. As I watched, my form seemed to waver, to become transparent, and then, with a sickening lurch in my stomach, it was gone. The screen showed an empty cubicle. My ergonomic chair was replaced by the standard one. My cactus, my photo, my mugs, all vanished from the recorded image as if they had never been. The dust covers he mentioned on the adjacent, unused equipment were suddenly, starkly visible. I stumbled back, gasping. No, I saw myself. It was there. Gregson stood up, his face grim. Look, mister, whoever you are, I think you need to leave. Now, before I call building security to escort you out. His tone was not unkind, but it was absolute. He thought I was disturbed, perhaps dangerous. I fled. The security office, the immutable truth of the recording that had changed before my very eyes. It was too much. My mind reeled. Was I losing my sanity? Or was reality itself becoming fluid, rewriting itself around me, erasing me from its narrative? I didn't go to my cubicle that day. I couldn't. I found an unused conference room on a higher floor, one rarely booked, and sat in the darkness, trying to breathe, trying to think. My meticulously documented log felt useless now. What good were facts when reality itself was subjective, malleable? I started to experiment in small, desperate ways. I'd leave a generic pen on a table in the break room. When I returned an hour later, it would be gone. Not unusual, pens wander. But then I tried scratching a tiny, almost invisible mark on the underside of the table with my keychain. The next day, I checked. The table was smooth, unmarked. I noticed that people didn't just fail to acknowledge me. They physically moved as if I weren't there. If I stood in a corridor, they wouldn't walk around me. They would walk through the space I occupied, their paths unaltered, their bodies passing without contact, without any indication that they had encountered an obstacle. I felt no impact, only a strange, cold displacement of air, like a breeze from an unseen source. My reflection was the next thing to visibly change. For days, I'd avoided looking too closely. But one afternoon, in the deserted executive washroom, another place my badge now inexplicably granted access to, I forced myself to look in the large, gilt-edged mirror. My image was faint, like a watercolor painting left out in the rain. The outlines were blurry, the colors muted. I could see the wall tiles behind me, through my own translucent form. Panic, a raw, primal scream, rose in my throat, but no sound emerged. My voice, too, was fading. My physical needs were also diminishing. I rarely felt hungry anymore. The thought of food was distant, unappetizing. Thirst was a dull ache I could ignore for longer and longer periods. Sleep became a shallow, restless state, often found in forgotten storage closets or under desks in darkened corners of the office after everyone else had left. I was becoming a creature of the shadows, sustained by, what? The ambient energy of the building? My own fading momentum? I stopped trying to talk to anyone. What was the point? My words were unheard, my presence unregistered. I became an observer, a ghost in the machine of Innovate Solutions Incorporated. I watched Chloe lead Phoenix Project meetings, presenting strategies I had drafted, using data I had analyzed. I saw Ben get promoted into a role that would have, by rights, been mine. He accepted the congratulations with a pleased, slightly self-conscious smile, never knowing, or perhaps never allowed to know, the debt he owed to a phantom colleague. Sarah Jenkins, my former manager, would sometimes walk past the empty space where my cubicle had been. Occasionally, she'd pause, a slight frown creasing her forehead, as if sensing a momentary void, a missing piece in the office feng shui, before shaking her head slightly and moving on. Did some vestige of my presence linger there, a psychic stain that pricked at her subconscious? Or was it merely an empty desk in a busy office, briefly catching her eye? The company prepared for its annual town hall meeting. It was always a big affair, held in the large auditorium on the ground floor. The chief executive officer, Mr. Alistair Thompson, a man whose photograph adorned the lobby and whose pronouncements shaped the lives of hundreds of employees, would deliver his keynote address on the company's performance and future vision. In my previous life, my fully corporeal life, I had always found these events vaguely tedious, full of corporate jargon and carefully managed optimism. Now, the thought of it filled me with a strange, reckless purpose. If I was to be erased, I would make one last attempt to ripple the surface of their reality. On the day of the town hall, the auditorium was packed. The air buzzed with anticipation, the low murmur of hundreds of conversations. I walked through the crowd, an invisible current in a human river. No one jostled me. No one made way. I simply passed through. Mr. Thompson took the stage to polite applause. He was a portly man in an expensive suit, his silver hair impeccably coiffed. He beamed at the audience, a practiced, avuncular smile. He began his speech, his voice amplified by the sound system, resonant and confident. He spoke of innovation, of synergy, of shareholder value, of the bright future that awaited Innovate Solutions. As he reached a crescendo, speaking about the unbreakable spirit and dedication of our incredible team, I walked onto the stage. I moved slowly, deliberately, positioning myself directly beside him at the podium. I stood less than a foot away. He didn't flinch, didn't pause. His arm, gesturing expansively to emphasize a point about market penetration, passed directly through my chest. I felt nothing but that familiar, cold whisper of displaced air. I looked out at the sea of faces, hundreds of employees, my former colleagues, my erstwhile team members. Their eyes were fixed on Mr. Thompson, attentive, some nodding, some taking notes. Not a single gaze flickered towards me. I opened my mouth. I gathered all my remaining will, all my frustration, all my despair, and I screamed. I screamed my name. I screamed for them to see me. I screamed that I was real. No sound emerged. Or if it did, it was on a frequency they could no longer perceive. My throat worked, my lungs expelled air, but the auditorium remained filled only with Mr. Thompson's booming voice and the rapt silence of his audience. He continued, oblivious. "Our people are our greatest asset," he declared, his hand once again sweeping through the space where my ethereal heart should have been. A profound, chilling understanding settled over me. It wasn't just that they couldn't see me or hear me. It was that, in this reality, the reality curated by Innovate Solutions Incorporated, I simply did not exist. I was not a ghost of a former employee. I was a fundamental error, a piece of data that had been so thoroughly corrupted and deleted that there was no record, no trace, no memory left to even haunt. Defeated, I turned and walked off the stage. I moved through the auditorium, a silent, unseen departure. I walked out into the main lobby, the sound of Mr. Thompson's triumphant closing remarks and the subsequent applause fading behind me. I paused before the large glass entrance doors. Outside, the city bustled, alive and indifferent. I looked at my reflection in the polished glass. It was fainter than ever, a mere shimmer, like heat haze on asphalt. I could see the street scene through my own form with almost perfect clarity. My hand, when I raised it, was nearly transparent. What now? Where did a non-person go? Could I leave this building, this sphere of erasure? Or was I bound to it, a forgotten cog in a machine that had ground me down to nothing? I reached for the door handle. My translucent fingers passed through the cool metal. For a moment, panic seized me. Was I trapped? But then I remembered. I didn't need doors anymore. I focused. not on the physical barrier, but on the space beyond it, and I simply moved. I passed through the glass, not with a shattering, but with a sigh, like smoke drifting through a keyhole. I stood on the sidewalk, the city noise washing over me, the vibrations of traffic under my feet. People streamed past, their solid forms brushing through my own insubstantiality. I felt a flicker of something. Was it freedom, or just a different kind of void? I tried to go home, to my apartment. The key, still in my pocket, felt alien, a relic from a life that was no longer mine. When I reached my building, the doorman, who had greeted me by name for 3 years, looked straight through me as I passed into the lobby. My apartment door. I didn't even try the key. I simply willed myself through it. The apartment was as I had left it that morning, or what felt like that morning, though time had taken on a strange elasticity. My books on the shelves, my unwashed coffee cup in the sink, my rumpled bed. But it felt empty, not just unoccupied, but devoid of my essence. It was no longer my home. It was just a place where someone named Mark Petrov used to live. I didn't stay. There was nothing for me there. I found myself drawn back, inevitably, to Innovate Solutions Incorporated. It was the epicenter of my unmaking, the place where the rules of my reality had been so thoroughly and ruthlessly rewritten. I drifted through its silent after-hours corridors, an unseen spectator to the nightly ballet of cleaning crews and blinking server lights. It was during one of these nocturnal wanderings, weeks or perhaps months later, I had lost any real track of time, that I found it. In a disused sub-basement, in a forgotten corner, piled high with obsolete equipment and decaying cardboard boxes, I saw a flicker. Not a flicker of light, but a flicker in the very fabric of my perception, similar to what I'd experienced with the security footage. Drawn by an instinct I didn't understand, I moved closer. There, etched into the grimy surface of a discarded server casing, almost invisible under layers of dust, was a name. Not typed, not printed, but scratched, as if with a desperate fingernail. Eleanor Vance. I was here. Below it, fainter still, another name, and another. A hidden history, a silent testament to others who had been unmade. I wasn't the first. A strange sense of peace, or perhaps just resignation, settled over me. I was no longer Mark Petrov, senior analyst. I was something else, a whisper in the server hum, a cold spot in a forgotten corridor, a barely there shimmer in a darkened window. I am still here, in the heart of Innovate Solutions Incorporated. I watch the endless cycle of projects and deadlines, of ambition and quiet desperation. I see new faces arrive, full of hope and drive, and I wonder which of them, if any, will one day begin to fade. Sometimes, late at night, when the building is utterly still, I think I feel other presences like mine, faint, ethereal, moving through the walls, through the floors, the other erased ones. We don't communicate, not in any way that humans would understand, but there is a shared awareness, a silent communion of the forgotten. The process of my erasure was so complete, so seamless, that I have no illusions of ever returning to what I was. My existence, if you can call it that, is now defined by my absence. I am the silence where a voice used to be, the empty chair that no one questions, and I observe. I remember, even if no one else does. I am the hidden history and the ongoing, quiet horror of this place, and I wonder, with a detachment that is perhaps the final stage of my transformation, who will be next.